Hello, and welcome to BrightSign Live. I'm your co-host, Matt Harnack, and I'm a BrightSign video producer, and today I'm joined by solution architect John Arnio. John, can you tell us what you're working on right now at BrightSign?
Yeah, totally. So, yeah, as a solutions architect, it's really all customer focused, just helping our customers find answers, solutions, that sort of thing, with working with our players. It's a vast ecosystem. We're right in the middle of it. We make a great piece of hardware, a great operating system, great integrations, all that sort of thing. So really, it's all about making the right connections, getting resources, answers, solutions, that sort of thing. So all about maximizing what you can do with our BrightSign players, which is what today's show is really all about. We're very partner focused. We love working with our partners. We love the things that our partners have done, and those um, that's what it's all about, really maximizing what you can do with the BrightSign player.
That's right. Today's session is a partner spotlight where we're going to show how BrightSign players integrate really well with Signagelive and the Signagelive platform. But first, if you're new to BrightSign, we have some resources that I'd like to tell you about and familiarize you with. So first, we have the BrightSign Academy. BrightSign Academy is a series of courses that covers BrightSign and its products. The courses start off really basic and then they progress to more advanced topics, so you don't need any prior experience to get started. And these tools will help you master digital signage and provide you with a pathway to become a BrightSign authorized reseller or BrightSign certified. Plus, we have a lot of Avixa accredited courses, so you can get some Avixa credits there too. We also have BrightSign Docs. So that BrightSign Docs contains user guides, reference manuals, developer notes, and step-by-step procedures for all BrightSign products and services. And then there's the knowledge base. And the knowledge base is basically lots of Q&A, FAQs, and lots of resources from our support team. You can use the QR codes to get these resources right here on the screen, or you can find them on our website, brightsign.biz. Docs and BrightSign Academy are under the Resources tab, and you can get to the knowledge base by clicking on the Support button. I want to also say that the chat is open, so say hi in the chat, and we will be answering your questions live at the end of the show. So please use the Ask button, and we will do our best to answer those questions live. Okay, let's get started.
Let's do it. Look who we have.
Today, we have a special guest named Tim Baker. He's the product marketing manager at Signagelive, and he's an all around digital signage resident expert at the company. We've had a great time prepping for this show. And Tim, can you walk us through today's agenda and tell us a little bit about the platform Signagelive?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity here to demonstrate some of the things we want to talk about today. Very much appreciated. Yeah, so my name is Tim, and what we want to talk to you about today is what Signagelive brings to the table and where we kind of really fit into the market. So from us, it's all about enterprise and managing the BrightSign devices at scale. So rather than having your individual one-to-one players, how do you manage digital signage at a much grander scale when we're talking about multiple locations or multiple users? And really, how do we streamline the content management of that process whilst making sure that our players' uptime is working? And really what we'll walk you through today is with that in mind is envisaging managing multiple players over multiple locations and distributing that content.
Awesome. All right. Let's get started on showing how to set up a player.
Yeah, so let me set the scene for everybody here real quick. So as Tim said, it's all about these large scale deployments. So we're a little bit challenged here today that we don't have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of players that we can deploy and get it all set up. But we're going to use our imaginations a little bit here. So what we've got set up is a bank of BrightSign players in my lab here, and in particular, I'm going to focus on four XD1034 players that we've got configured. And what we're going to do is assign each of those players to one of our four screens that we've got available here. So we've got an upper left, upper right, lower left, lower right that we're going to refer to these as. But what I want you to do is imagine as we're going through this demonstration that it's not necessarily four players on 4 screens, this could potentially be hundreds of players, 200 players, 400 players, and not screens that are necessarily in the same physical space, but in different cities of the world. So that's going to be what today's demonstration is really going to do. Is we're going to refer to these screens by their city name. So we're going to have New York City, London, Perth, and Paris as our 4 cities. So Tim is going to walk us through the platform, and that's going to be how we're going to demonstrate working with Signagelive and BrightSign.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the first things I wanted to talk about with this is the actual provisioning of these devices, because from the way that we manage with existing clients, it's all about being able to provision at mass as well as the ongoing management of the content. So that's one of the first things we wanted to talk about. I don't know if we want to jump straight into the first bit here where I'll guide through
let's
through
do
that. Okay, so what we're actually going to do here is we've got all the licenses set up for this provisioning ready to go. So a range of different licenses, we can find that in the settings tab here. And all of these licenses aren't currently associated with any device, and they're just sitting here waiting to go. So you might buy, 1-year license, 2-year license. They all sit there with their timeframes basically frozen in stasis until we configure them to a player. So they're not ticking down at any point when they're not associated with those devices. And you can go through this and do this on a one-to-one basis. But again, we're thinking more enterprise here. So how do we do this at scale? So to do that, we're going to utilize a tool called bdeploy. So we can hit the plus button on the top left and go to our players. And then we've got the 2 options, BrightSign manual, which is that one-to-one relationship. And what we're going to do today is do that through bdeploy, which kind of expands upon how quickly we can do this at mass. So at that point, we can enter in the BrightSign serial numbers. So we actually have a direct connection to the BrightSign API and grab that. But we're going to download the CSV template, and I'll actually open up one here that I made earlier. And this is an example of this up and running. So we've entered in the hardware IDs to the very far left and the license code we want to associate with it. And then we've added in all of the individual items and parameters we want to attach to that player. So what's the player's name? What address is it at? What time zone is it running on? Is it portrait or landscape? And all of those things that typically or traditionally we'd have to do this on a one-by-one basis and then replicate that over and over again. But what this means is once we've taken this file and dragged it over, we're going to go and upload. Oh, no, let's go click and drag. Oh, no, sorry, I have to hit the upload button, double click that. That will then go and find all of these players. So it's going to go and communicate with BrightSign directly, find out what the player, what player it is that we're looking at. You can see on the left here, it dictates which players we've got. And we're going to select every single one of these devices here. And you can see on the right, we've got additional tags I could have added in, but we're just keeping it fairly simple at the moment. Select all the players and hit add to players. And at this point, we should be able to swap over and start to see the players deploying into this structure that we've set up.
Okay, so we'll come back here to look at these screens. So there's a couple of interesting things going on here, and I have to geek out a little bit here as a BrightSigner. You reference bdeploy, which is a really interesting concept here. So we'll zoom in, and so these players are gonna receive that instruction from Signagelive to activate and deploy themselves into your CMS platform, just using the serial number of my BrightSign players, which is
right. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I like to call the right way of doing things. It's a single dashboard, single pane of glass. Like you've got our serial, or I provide the serial numbers to you. You import them, and it's an automatic provisioning process. I mean, that's amazing.
Right. If you think about it in a real life situation, and those examples that I've spoken about before with 400 to 600 players, we've done this in a real environment where rather than have someone set up a table somewhere, because in reality that's what you'd have to do,
Right.
And they'd spend the next week putting in an SD card, making sure it's turned on, going through the SD card provisioning, doing that on an individual basis, which I mean it's just not scalable. With this, you can do the provisioning in 20 minutes, and the second that player receives power, Ethernet, and is ready to go, it will just configure itself, which makes things much more manageable and allows you to then focus on the thing that you really want to focus on, which is getting that content delivered.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
once you've set up one player, you quickly are like, how can I set up a bunch of players at once?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
But I should also point out, by the way, all of my BrightSign players were in a factory reset state. So these are out of the box. So the purple activation screen that they were sitting on that's what you get once you plug it in to network for the very first time.
Yeah.
So All right, so they're starting to come online. So we've got one here that hit the green checkbox. So this is basically um, the default content, I guess you could call it, that just signifies that the player is now attached to the Signage Live platform, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And from a best practice perspective, we probably suggest that, day one, just go and upload a playlist that displays everywhere. So the second it does convert over, it's displaying something that's attractive. But this is its kind of de facto state where it's just confirming that, hey, we've managed to do what we need to do. It's all configured and it's ready to go for the next step.
Got it. Okay. All right. So what is the next step?
So the next step, what we're going to do today is take it from very, very basic all the way up to complex. So the most basic piece that we can do is actually just create a playlist of content. And one of the things that we focused on, especially with scalability, is how do we make this as easy as possible at scale? And that's actually disconnecting our playlist from everything else. And I'll kind of display that in the simplest way. So if we go over to the screen share here, so I'm going to go over to, this is our dashboard, just gives us a high level. Going to go to content drop down, and we're going to create a new playlist from scratch by selecting create and edit. And then on the left hand side here, we've got a range of folders, so we can organize our content in the way that we want to see it. In the center section that you can see just to the right there, we've got a preview, and we can go and upload our content. So things from the marketplace, which is a range of free content, media asset upload, like your images and videos, web pages, RSS feeds, whatever it is that you're looking to display, you'll just upload that and manage it in the playlist editor. So we're going to go and click on media asset upload, and I'm actually going to upload a couple of files here that we prepped earlier. And here we go. Confirm that I want to upload these, and they'll be stored and ready for us once they're processed in the recently added tab. What I'm going to do is actually just take a couple of video files. And again, these don't have to be videos, could be images, could be web pages, and just create a really, really basic playlist of content and save that playlist. And we're going to call it the BrightSign Live playlist. And we'll come back to this playlist a few times. Once that's done, it'll ask us, will we like to publish this right now? I.e., do we want to send this out to the players? And we're actually going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to configure this playlist to display everywhere. Let's say this is 200 players. I'm going to say from now on, we're going to display it from now on until further notice, but it could be more time sensitive. Confirm the playlist that we want to send. And that looks like the one we built. And then select the devices we want to send it to. So actually, in this case, I'm going to select our 4 players that we've configured. And 1, 2, 3, 4. And then hit the publish button. That will do a quick double check to make sure that, hey, everything's working as expected, and it is. And we'll hit that publish button. We can now head back to the dashboard, and that will then give us an overview of what's going on with these players. So you can see if I hit the refresh button here, we've got the green tabs beside each player saying, hey, everything's ready. It's now turned red to say, actually, you've done something here and the player isn't displaying it. So give us a few minutes whilst we process that. So literally live as it's going through that process, it's telling you what's going on. And now that I've refreshed it again, you can actually see the progress bar happening. So as those assets on an individual basis are getting uploaded, you're getting that progress view. And if I go into an individual player here, it follows the same suit. So we can just go and have a look at what content's planned for this player, what stage during that process is it set up on. And then once that's configured, we should be able to swap over and see the playlist start to appear on the players. Give it a couple of seconds.
Okay, so so a couple of interesting things are happening here that, yeah, this is happening already. So each BrightSign player, for those that are new to the ecosystem and to the hardware, they all have micro SD cards in them. So that bit that you were showing of the upload process, there's the content being uploaded into the platform, and then there's also some behind the scenes where that content gets deployed to the player, meaning the player is actually going to download that, cache it locally to the card, and play back locally, right?
100%. Yeah, we try to utilize as much of BrightSign as we can do. And that local storage of the content, obviously, helps deliver that content in an offline capability if there is internet outage for any period of time. And it also is just super useful for bandwidth, just to stop us from having to stream or re-download content regularly. Once it's there, it's intelligent with that content. And if we delete off assets, it's just going to go and delete the files that it needs to. It's not re-downloading everything. So we're as frugal with your bandwidth as possible, is the way I like to put it.
Got it. Okay, so then these are, it looked like you did 5 separate videos. You arranged them into a linear playlist, and then, so each of these videos is going to play full screen, 1920 by 1080 for these screens, one video after the next, and just keep looping and repeating that playlist.
Right. Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, it's the bare basics of playlists. There's nothing fancy or clever going on yet. It's simply that they're all being deployed the exact same playlist But because they're being deployed from one playlist, if we make an amendment to that singular playlist, it will affect all of those devices.
Right.
And as someone who's managing the network, like you're in London right now and John's in Virginia, that's totally possible, right? That's something that would be really common in a network for a network administrator or somebody managing a network of players, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's because it's cloud based, there's no limitation as to where you are in the world. You can manage that entirely, wherever you are location wise. And we'll talk about this a little bit further as we go on, but with multiple users as well. It doesn't matter where you are region wise.
Got it. Okay.
So cool.
All right. So let's get a little more advanced. This is a really good basic start.
Okay, so now that we've displayed these playlists, we're going to go into the next step, which is actually sending these out to create a layout design. So actually taking one of these screens and adding in multiple zones of content. So if I swap over now to that, we'll go over here and we're going to start with our home page. We're going to go and create a new layout design from scratch. And to do that, we're going to go to the top left-hand corner. We're not going to go create playlists. We're going to go to the next step, building out our layout design. So we've got some layout designs which I've made here in the past. I'm actually going to go and double click on one that we've made before, but I could go and create a new layout from scratch. But just to open one that we've made previously and explain what we've done here, we've got our background image, which is just a JPEG, which I can change using my background. And that could be your own design or something you've picked up from the marketplace. But we've just put a Signagelive branded one on there. Then we've got each individual zone here, which you can see. So we've got multiple zones that are running schedulable zones. And if I click this button, it will add in a new schedulable zone, which we can organize and click and drag and pull to wherever we want it to be on the screen. I can also go into the zone elements and properties and be X, Y specific if we've got someone using Photoshop that we want to work that alongside. But I'm just going to delete this one off for the moment because we've already got the structure that we want. And I'm going to go and save that. So as well as the content zones, we also work with things like RSS, images, individual text elements, whatever we want to do. And we can highlight each zone and move them along. We can actually click on one of the zones and go and change things like the navigation. So I can put one zone on top of the other. So if you want to do something really fancy with a transparent PNG, with a video underlay on that, you could do. So that's our design. We've got 4 different zones, which we're now going to feed to the playlist that we want to send them. So we could save this and update this now. So this has actually already been published. So I'm going to hit save and update their existing layout design. And again, we could go back and update any changes. I could also save this as a copy. So if I want to make any alterations to this layout design that are slightly different, we could absolutely do that as well. And we can see all of the options of the layout designs that we have up and running. Next step then, now that we've created that, is actually just to go and publish this just like we would do with a playlist. Exactly the same process. We want it to display from now on until further notice. We're going to go and open up a layout design instead of the playlist. And at this point, we simply just need to select the template that we want to use and start filling in each zone with the content we want to see. So in this main zone, I'm actually going to take the same playlist, the BrightSign Live playlist, and put it into that content zone. On the top right, I'm going to go and add in the Notice app playlist. So go down here and find that. And on the bottom right, we're going to go and select the, let's have a look for another video that we want to associate with that. So we might actually just go and grab a video over here and drop that into. So each of these zones, as they're getting filled out, we're basically just telling them which playlist they're distributing from. So if we make an amendment to that playlist, it will update that zone automatically. The next step then is, once we're happy with that, is to go down and select the players we want to publish that to, just to make sure we've got a bit of variety on the screens that we're showing here. We're actually just going to send this to one player. So we're going to take this top left screen and hit OK, and we're going to publish that out to the player to make that alteration. So once we've hit save, like so, we should be ready to go. And I can then head back to my dashboard if I want to go and have a look at how that player configuration is going. Go into my specific player and go into my content tab on the top left. And if I hit refresh, we should be able to see that update. Then we'll see the change from the existing piece of content. And there we go, over to the new display, which hasn't yet been published, but it's in that rotation of content. And the latest content always takes precedence. So this will overtake whatever was previously there. So we should be able to hop back over now and actually see that transition onto the screen. Oh, there we go.
What's really interesting to me that occurred, that it was kind of a surprise the first time I saw this, is that on these other screens, we have this original video playlist that you created of those 5 videos. And then you created this layout, and it's actually the exact same playlist, right? It's the same content. It's playing the exact same thing modularly now inside of that zone, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's 100% by design because it means that the end experience, there's the three different stages as you go through configuring and deploying your digital signage. Is the first is that, oh, wow, look at all of this content we need to make. And the next piece is, okay, we need to go and configure this content workflow. How do we structure it to get delivered? And what doing it in this way means is that by the end of that process, once everyone's settled with the way they want to deliver content, it's just how many playlists do I need to manage? There's
Right.
no, going and visiting the layout designs every day. We want you to avoid using the layout designer and the publisher as much as possible once it's been done, because we know people aren't changing that on a daily basis. It's just the content within that often gets changed.
Right. And so you can create as many of these, layout templates as you want, and then you could freely mix in, like I said, this playlist content, or, I think you were going through, you saw the different widgets that you could drop into those different regions, but never actually have to re-edit the layout itself, right? Like it's own modular, self-contained component, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, as a kind of bonus piece of information there is, if you did have a layout design like that had been distributed to 200 players and you realize one of the zones is a pixel off, you can actually update them all without having to redo that process. As long as you haven't made any additional zones, you can just make a slight alteration to the live layout design and it will affect all of the live players
Right.
too.
Right. You did actually mention there was another piece of it that I kind of caught on to, and this is something I talk about a lot with customers as a content creator. It's the whole Photoshop concept, right? It's just knowing that you can work in something like Photoshop, and get that pixel perfect, composition of what you want to do, and then actually
Mhm.
turn that into your digital signage layout here, in your platform. And I think that's a really important piece to know, is that, design there first and then actually create that, here.
Yeah, and actually, as an interesting tidbit, though, I know we haven't mentioned up until now, but I'll throw it in on live just to really shake things up. Is we actually do have a Photoshop plugin as well, so you can distribute your content via Photoshop to Signage Live directly.
Oh,
Oh, that's
okay.
really cool.
Yeah,
I
All
like
right.
thought
So
I'd
that.
tell
throw
me,
that one in on the live.
yeah, tell me a
Yeah.
little bit more about that. Is this a layered Photoshop document?
It's literally, you're taking, if you're working in Photoshop and you've created your image files that you'd like to send over to Signage Live,
Mhm.
there's a plugin that we've worked with Creative Cloud, so you can select Signage Live within your Photoshop application and say send to my folder in Signage Live, add these tags, send as a JPEG and go, and they will just
Interesting.
then turn up within Signage Live. So
Okay.
you may
Do
have
you
content creators that don't have access to Signage Live; they just have the plugin.
Ooh, I
do
like
you
that.
use is it are you using slices? Is that the are you separating it into sections on, like, are you getting the dimensions properly on Photoshop, or are you just
Yeah,
export? How
Yeah,
does that
it
work?
just exports the entire file as a JPEG or PNG asset in
Hmm.
plans of preparation that there'd be a team on the other side to go and pick up the content and plan the distribution.
Hmm.
So that's typically beneficial when you've got an individual that's just purely there to design the content and they're not really there to manage it. But it saves them having access to the platform where they don't necessarily need it or need additional training. They simply just say, I've done my piece of work, upload it, and it can sit there waiting for approval and distribution.
That's very
Cool.
cool. I like that. I like that a lot. Okay. All right. So we've got one player running a custom layout. We still got playlists on these others. So I think at this point, what we want to do is start defining our cities of the world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the one thing that we do want to go over in a little bit of detail first before going into that is just a little bit of tidying up with the playlist management, because we did go through that really quickly.
Okay.
So if we've got just going to go over the playlist management piece briefly in terms of some additional functionality on there, if we can load up. In this example. Yeah, so one of the things I did just want to go over really quickly, within these playlists that we create, obviously as you continue, you can go into each individual asset, you can do things like change the validity and the reoccurrence. So you might have assets within a playlist that are scheduled for next week or next month. So you do have the choice to start building that out. You can also go to the playlist manager here and do things like organize playlist folders. So obviously, when we're talking about really large scale playlist folders, we might want to start making location-based folders to manage our files a little bit easier and just make it easier for us to structure that and find the content where we want to. So once I've got all of that configured, that's pretty much it. So we can double click again onto that playlist. We've got a BrightSign Live playlist as we had before, and I can go to the control assets, which we'll go into a little bit more detail later. I'll move that over for later. So if we swap back over, I'll be able to go through the next piece. Let me just set this up for later. So yeah, I'm going to call this the BrightSign Live local playlist, and I'm going to actually assign this to our Paris player and schedule this for content to only be displayed for 2 assets. So we'll walk through this in a little bit more detail. Basically, what I'm doing here is configuring a local playlist, which means that local user is going to be able to deliver content to the BrightSign player whilst not having full access to the total playlist. So what we've got here is that configuration all up and running.
So basically what you're doing here, just to kind of summarize, is we've got this player that's using a custom layout, and this seems like the most logical, implementation of this is when you're working with a multi-zone layout in this fashion. You've got your main zone running that original playlist that you created, but then any one of the other zones, you can isolate it down to, a user so that they can only control that zone and that playlist, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we can make it to the point where the bottom right-hand corner is being managed by a completely siloed experience of local users, where they're delivering their content like images and videos, whereas a more head office level, you've got users that are, in control of that content. What's really nice about that is their experience is much simpler. So they don't have to go through the reporting or the management or any of those pieces. They're simply just going to go and make alterations that they need to, and they'll update on whichever location. And we can also limit that down. So the Paris users only can affect the Paris players, and they can't accidentally go and upload their localized content to New York as well.
Right. Okay.
This is great. Yeah, I think that's a real strength of Signage Live. Each CMS partner has their own strengths. BrightSign has its strengths, but this really seems like Signage Live has a huge strength in this like management of enterprise level network management.
I like like you said, the siloed experience per user, right? So it's the, if that bottom right zone was the responsibility of one person, they don't need to necessarily concern themselves with the broader layout and the other content. It's just that piece, not only localized, but, focused on a team or a member of the team that can be responsible for that. It's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've got some examples out there at the moment where we've got 600 device users, and instead of just having one digital signage champion, where the kind of all of the weight is on their shoulders to manage the content, is they manage the global output, and a lot of it's corporate communication for this instance. But then you've got the localized teams that are responsible for their content, but it's a smaller segment of the screen, and it just allows them to mix. And you actually have 2 choices, one of which is to segment the screen as we've done here with layout designs, or you could even get more complex and say, actually, I just want one of the 20 assets I'm displaying is local and the other 20, and that just rolls into a full playlist, full screen. So the choice is completely yours when you build that out. In fact, one of the things I wanted to go through now is the tagging functionality, which is really core to how this works, if you're ready for me to go into that.
All right.
So if I go over to the playlist manager here, what I can do is control the way that the players are distributing content based on tags. So I'm actually going to go into each individual player and associate their region's tag. So as we've seen, Paris, New York, we're just configuring, putting these together now. What we actually want to do is build this out so each player has their own independent tag. But you can create as many tags on these players as you want. It could be 100 tags to each player based on location, portrait orientation, landscape orientation, whatever suits our best practice. And because you're writing this yourself, there's really no right or wrong way. It's about building what's going to be easiest for you to manage content. And what we'll do, if I save this, is I'm actually going to go and deploy some content this way. So going to my content dropdown and going to my playlist manager, we're going to open up the BrightSign Live playlist that we were managing a moment ago. And we're actually going to go and delete off all of that content. Let's go and highlight all content and delete. And then we're going to simply click and drag our new 4 videos that we had at the beginning. And we've got our Paris, our New York, our London, Perth. And I'm going to double click on each of these assets and go into the conditioning. So I'm going to schedule that this asset only displays on Paris location. And I'm going to do that for each asset in this example. So we've got Paris goes to Paris, New York goes to New York, but you might then have a 5th piece of content, which is global. And we don't add any tags to that. So it automatically distributes to all of the players that we have. And by doing this, we can really, really quickly build out the way that our content gets distributed, but we still only have one playlist. So just finishing off London and then finally double click on Perth, go to condition, and add in Perth. And note
So
that I'm not going
slick.
to, yeah, I'm not going to go and publish this. I'm just going to hit the save button. We don't need to go through that process of publishing it again. It knows this playlist needs to go everywhere. In this case, 4 players, but it could be 200. And that's it. Then we can swap over to the preview. Hopefully we should see those players start to pick up their latest content as they go through. And this will be regionalized. So again, you'll see in the demonstration here, but they'll still follow the continued playlist planning that we had. So we'll just give it a second here to catch up.
So basically behind the scenes, again, it's, the new video assets, the new content that you have added is getting downloaded locally to each player, cached on the card, and then played back. So once all of that transfer takes place, then it actually starts. Oh, here we go. So okay, that's interesting. So I wasn't actually expecting this to happen because this is still using your layout, your custom layout that you created. So this didn't take over the full screen with that playlist. It's now still isolated into that zoned layout.
Yeah, absolutely. So it follows that same trend. It's not breaking the tradition of where that playlist is going. It's purely updating the content within that playlist and redistributing it. And as you see with the new ones that are coming on now, because we've only assigned one asset to each tag, it's the only asset to play. So it will just display as if that's the only content it wants to display.
Right. Okay. And because those were full screen 1920 1080 videos, they still take up the full screen in this case. So there's another piece of this that I thought was really interesting that we were talking about before, is that you've got a playlist of 4 videos. It could be 100 videos. It could be hundreds of gigs gigs of video sizes. But based on the tagging, the players are only playing the video that belongs to them.
Right.
But they're not actually downloading the entire playlist. They only download what they need to download. Right,
exactly.
Right.
Yeah, again, it's more about being frugal with that bandwidth. If we had a really, really large rollout with 100 different assets that need to be displayed, and there's one asset per player, it would make no sense to download the other 99 assets. Right. So it's all about understanding and writing only what we need to on the player to speed up the process of downloading that content, and again, just more bandwidth saving.
Right. Okay. Yeah, so we got all 4 online now. So there's our New York City, London, Perth, and Paris.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very cool. I like it. Yeah, this is really neat. I love the modular approach to this. It just looks like a very, very flexible tool.
Yeah, my head is spinning on imagining how easy it would be to manage a network of players like this.
Right. Oh, and then so on the tags too, right? So we've got tags created at a very high level, simple, one tag, one player, one piece of content. You could combine tags and start to build some Boolean logic for those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can make what we've built here today is fairly simple, but a lot of the times it ends up being, do you want to be able to sell a product and you're out of stock in the East Coast? So actually, rather than just saying, I only want to display it, you can actually use that as a negative term and say, don't display in these regions or locations. Mm-hmm. Or you could go and say, this location and this location for this asset is suitable, but nowhere else. What you can also do on top of that is start to at a glance, if you needed to, create your own cluster of players. Like if someone comes up to you and says, we need players 1, 6, and 7 to be able to display this content, and you don't have that, well, you can have each tag associated with the player. So players 1, their player code basically just becomes another tag that you can use. So you can do any combination. And then with that coinciding with things like the local user functionality, and we don't expect that everyone uses every single piece of this. It's more about in preparation for expansion, and when those tools become required, they're ready to go and built into Signagelive by default. So it's not kind of an a la carte, pick what you need. It's all there ready to go the day you need that functionality to streamline your content.
Right. Okay, so you could combine you could basically combine all of these tools, the different layouts, the tagging functionality, the local user isolation, that whole function. You could basically have some combination or blend of all of these and really start to fine tune, down to a store level, for example, exactly what content goes where.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Okay. Now, so in all of these examples, you're like the head guy running the show, right? So you're doing all of the work from the main dashboard. You're controlling this whole thing. So I would assume in addition to, the mass player deployment and the mass content deployments, that now there's this concept of, well, what if you're more than one person and you're, a team of people spread out in different offices?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the kind of latest features that we brought out just at the end of last year actually is granular user permissions. So as well as the local user functionality that we kind of demonstrated in terms of that siloed experience for them, building out granular user permissions for us was really important because we're starting to have questions asked about these really large entities that need function where a user might only need one or two features available to them, down to a really, really granular level. So with that, we've built granular user permissions, which I can demonstrate and go through today and just give you a bit of a high level overview. So if I go to, we're on our dashboard at the moment. What we want to do is start to configure the way that granular user permissions work for us. So how do we want to structure a user or a group of users to be able to deploy the content that we want them to see? So let's say, for example, you've got a really big corporate entity and we go to the settings and we look at our roles. We can have a look at existing roles. So these are the ones that traditionally we've always had there. So things like administrator, read-only user, just things that most CMS platforms have out there by default. But what we've done as a next step is to start to compartmentalize all of those. So if I click the plus button and create a new role from scratch, there's, we're going to name this, we'll call this content plus. So I know I've already got a content. We'll add content plus in there. And I'm actually going to enable two-factor authentication for this group of users. So anyone who has this role will automatically require 2FA to access. And then what it's going to do when I hit OK is it's going to load up 250 different permission sets. So in this case, we're going to create a content team, but it could be, a license administrator team, whatever it might be. And we've got a content group there. I'm going to hit all. So everything to do with content, this user is now going to have permission to be able to go and amend. So you can see all of the individual permission sets there, just that are relevant to content. They've all been ticked by clicking that all, but I'm going to leave the rest of it blank. So I'm going to leave player control, dashboard control, all of that's not relevant to this particular user. So that role is going to be built out to only have those features. So once all of that's done, we'll be able to save this and assign it. And again, we've got API configurations in there, which again, we can allow or deny for those users. Same thing with things like calendar as well. So we really break it down into everything you can do in Signagelive is a tick box in granular user permissions. At that point, we're going to hit OK. That role then gets allocated and added, and you can see the 2FA is associated with that as well over here. So that's a role, but we've not assigned a user to it yet. And rather do that on a one-to-one basis, I can actually go down to the users that I have. And you can see I've got one user here right now, and I'm going to have a look at every user within my network. Not many for this demonstration, but obviously there may be hundreds of them here. And what we can do is hit the plus button on the top left, and we're going to create a new user group, which is basically creating a content plus group. And I'm going to add that in there. And we're going to associate that with the role of content plus. So anything that the content plus role has will be associated to this user group. We can go in there and we could make amendments to this, but I'm actually going to keep it as is. So we've got all of those content boxes are ticked off. They're all ready to go. And this role now is going to be pulled into this user group. And then I'm going to be able to allocate as many users into this user group as I want to. So I'm going to save that. Okay. Here we go. And then we've got our individual user. So I can manage this user on a one-to-one basis. Like I could hit the three dots on the right here and have a look at the player, the user, remove them from Signagelive, change their permission sets, whatever it might be on an individual basis. But what I'm actually going to do in this case, and just another piece, as we go back to the settings and users here, I can also remove them just manually on an intervention by one-to-one, or we could do that with Active Directory if we preferred to, but it's completely up to you. I'm going to actually take that user that has now got no permissions or nothing configured, and we're going to move them over to the Content Plus user group. And it's going to warn me, hey, we're going to make a change here. They're going to change their role permissions. Are you happy? And now that user has automatically picked up that Content Plus role. So all of those permissions rolled into that user. So if you have 25 different content team members, you can just throw them into that. And I'm actually going to swap over here and give you a view of this user, what this user sees. So this is our user's experience now. So they see a list of the playlists. So I can, have a look at the playlist I want to manage, double click on that particular playlist. But as you can see, I've got nothing on the top bar. There's no reporting. There's no player manager. There's no license manager. It's simply just what I'm responsible for. And that's pretty much it, to be honest with you. That just simplifies that experience for that user.
That's huge.
Yeah,
I
so
mean, that's a huge amount of functionality.
Yeah.
It looks very, very complicated to, as far as the number of different configurations and types of things that you can do, but incredibly
It looks
powerful.
complicated on the Signage Live development side, but it looks
Yeah,
simple for the user, which is,
exactly,
I
exactly.
guess, what you want.
I think a lot of this it's been driven by far more enterprise grade clients, and that's the kind of questions that we've been coming up against.
Hmm.
It's actually something, a lot of this when we first started looking at granular user permissions, and this isn't a tool that we expect everyone to use, but it is definitely the second you start looking at 100 devices or 200 devices, you start looking at the RFPs that you get, and it's like, do you have this? Do you have granular user permissions? Do we have the ability for least access for those users that need it? And it's all about creating that experience that simplifies training. So if you do have 100 users, how do you train them individually? Do you need to show them
Right.
everything? Well,
Right.
not necessarily. And then on the other side of that, it's about things like security. So can we limit down what these users have access to? The content team can't go and mess around with the license codes, or they can't go and do anything that they might want to do otherwise. They're really just cut down to the experience that they need.
Right. And so there's one of the things we were talking about earlier is the process of, planning the players, the content deployment, but this user setup process, the user deployment is an equally important piece of this to consider as far as the planning, right? It's just, what are your users going to do? Where are they? What are their responsibilities? And I do like the part that you said about making sure, that their experience and that training is simplified, right? Not everybody has to know everything about the entire deployment.
Yeah, totally. And it goes hand in hand with some of the things that we've been working with as well, which is, kind of more direct training. So it's not just at this point, when you're at this kind of volume, because we're talking, really from basic playlists to those 1 or 2 screens, all the way up to the 1,000+ deployment, is there's
Right.
very different levels of training and bespoke kind of one-to-one tuition that you need with that.
Right.
We do our best to create as much video content and making sure that it all makes sense and all the guides are out there. But when you start to look at that scale, you do need to start understanding the actual workflow of the content that you want to distribute, the user content, the user workflow that's got to be built out. And that's why we kind of do some more hand holding and understanding and direct training with those kinds of users.
Right, right. Do you have any sort of best practices or, recommendations on the order that you pursue? Because I mean, I think of these, probably overly simplifying, but as, it's the hardware, the content, the users. I mean, these things can all be done in parallel, or is there maybe a recommended order to pursue?
It's interesting because we're kind of in a situation with this call. We've got all the pieces in one live event. You've got the hardware, you've got the CMS, and the one thing that we don't have anyone directly responsible for here is the content, but the content is actually key. So
Right.
from my advice is always look at the content you want to deliver and where you want to deliver it to first.
Okay.
Once you know that, everything else is walking backwards. What playlist do we need to do to deliver that content? What users need to be set up to configure and manage that? And once you know what content you need to send where, and it's not a be all and end all if you don't get it all on day one. Start simple and get more complex. But that's where I would always start, is what content do we want to go? And then everything else kind of falls into place around it.
That's funny because that's what Matt and I always preach is content, content, content. Start with the content.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Yeah, you can
100%.
kind of prototype it in Photoshop. You can prototype it in Illustrator, or even on the back of a napkin, right? You prototype it first.
Yeah.
And then you build from there and increase the fidelity on each iteration.
Yeah.
And until you get, and I think what ends up happening is you start out with that idea of a playlist, and then the playlist goes to, oh, but wait a second, like there are other places and we need to localize. Oh, and then there are other users, and quickly you discover that there are more parts.
Yeah.
But it takes a little bit of time to have that happen.
Right.
It's the blockers as well. You'll have the content management and digital signage isn't siloed to one department. It should be a multi-department initiative. There should be multiple users that are getting involved and saying, hey, I want this and hey, I want that. And the amount of times that we have someone come over and said, okay, we're stuck now. We had this content workflow, but now someone's come and asked us, hey, can we do this slightly differently? Could I look after this piece of the screen, or could I just send this to Paris without affecting everything else? And that's where we've built this from. It's developed based on the things that we know that the customers and clients eventually get to the blocker point and say, we can't do this yet. And that's where it kind of gets built from.
Developed through experience, huh?
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
So we will get to Q&A here very, very shortly, but I think we have one little bonus piece of content that we do want to show. This is one of your new features, right?
Yeah, absolutely. When we talk about content that we build or features that we build based on request, this is number one. The thing that we've always been asked about, and internally the most excitement is around this product because it's something we've been asked about forever, which is how do I display my dashboards from secure metrics? How do I display those to my digital signage the best way possible? So that's things like Power BI, Grow, Gecko Board, Tableau, any kind of dashboard that you need a password and username to log into. Well, they use it, especially in the corporate communications, but not necessarily only things like retail back office experiences as well. They're saying, I want to be able to make the most of those metrics and I want to deliver them to those key users regularly with security. And in the past, it's always been, could you actually display this as a URL which doesn't have any passwords so we can distribute on digital signage? And could you have a player that sits behind? And none of it's secure enough. And this tends to be very sensitive data that people don't want other people seeing.
Right.
So with that, we've gone and built secure dashboards. It's kind of one of those features, which I can demonstrate now if we want to go. And I'll walk you through it. So if I go over to data sync services here, which is a different module, but it just allows us to look at the integrations. I've actually got my secure dashboards page on the top left here. So there's got some other applications that are coming soon, but secure dashboards is really a catch-all for anything with a password and username. So I'm going to go to secure dashboards. I'm going to go and manage the secure dashboards that I've made. I'm going to hit the plus button and we're going to go and create a new dashboard from scratch today, just to demonstrate this with Power BI. I'm going to call this the Power BI dash. And this is going to be set to synchronize every 5 minutes. It's your choice how often, but 5 minutes is the maximum at the moment. And we're going to use a smart login credential. So we're basically going to put in an existing credential that we had. So I've entered in my username and password, and that's stored as write only. So no one can intercept this. It's just purely writing that password when it needs to. And we're going to enter in our navigation URL, which is the URL I would use to log into Power BI. So we're going to paste this into that area like so. So that's our login configured. So I can actually test this now. That's going to qualify that my username and my credentials has managed to log into Power BI on my behalf to then go and get the next step, which will be the dashboard. So it's confirmed now. It's shown us the steps and said, yep, success. We've managed to log in. Now we need to do the next step, which is say, well, which dashboard do we actually want to display? So by scrolling down and adding a new page, we're going to go and test accessing this page on an incognito browser. So this is literally us trying to log in with no credentials. And as we try and log into this dashboard, it will tell us we can't, we failed. So we're going to take that same URL and we're going to build it into this new page. So we're going to call this marketing. There we go. And we do have the choice here to do this full screen or within the layout design with changing the X and the Y and kind of cropping it a little bit. I'm just going to keep this full screen for the moment, but we could always go and reduce that down. So now what that's doing is testing that validating that the credentials that you've given is able to log in and manage this dashboard and pick up that content and deliver it continuously to the players that you want to deliver it to, but we'll do that bit next. So once it goes through the test, it does take a minute because, from a live perspective, it's going up, it's actually logging in, it's grabbing the screenshot of the dashboard that you want to display and logging out again, and then securely delivering that via the data sync services to Signage Live. So this is what we would see. And that's exactly what would turn up on the screen. We'll probably crop that a little bit, I think, but we'll leave it for the moment. I'm actually going to go to my playlist editor here, go and find our Power BI app, which is in the marketplace. And again, there's a Power BI, there's a secure dashboards app. Click and drag that into a new playlist. I'm actually going to select the dashboard that we just made. And what I might do is change the duration there just a little bit longer so it doesn't refresh every couple of seconds, but every 5 minutes it'll update itself. And we'll save that playlist, give it a name. And again, you can have as many different dashboards. You configure hundreds of different dashboards from your Power BI login. So if you need to go and change your password, you're not doing this on a one-to-one relationship. You're doing this with your login credentials. So even if each department is running for Power BI, and I'm kind of talking over this bit now because it's the third time we've gone through the publisher, but it's exactly the same process. We're just grabbing that Power BI playlist and we're going to configure that to display on a different player. So hit OK, and then we should be able to swap over and see that turn up on the screen.
And there we go. So we made London our headquarters.
Yes. Yeah, so London's our headquarters, and we've kind of done this on the fly a little bit here. I would crop that a little bit, just get rid of the sidebars. But again, this is just a playlist, so it could be part of multiple zones of content. You could have a dashboard on your top left, whilst you've got your sales metrics that you pull from somewhere else on the top right. The configuration there is pretty endless. But what's really exciting about that is it's just so scalable, from having no solution at all to this being the first iteration of secure dashboards that we release. There's so much potential, and I'm personally super, super excited about it, because it's always been something we've been asked for. We've never really had the proper solution for it. And today, now we do.
That is amazing. Yeah, I do get that request a lot. A lot of customers are asking for that kind of thing. So it's good. It's really good to know that that's a solution. And like you said, when you start combining all of these different features, the layouts, the tagging, the zones, the different playlists, now the dashboards, I mean, that's a pretty good mix of features to do pretty much anything you can imagine.
Yeah,
I really feel like you could make a really cool control room where you can
Right.
see everything.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are the king of control rooms over there, looking at what your setup is today. I think that's more impressive than anything that we've got to set up for a live event. So a little bit jealous.
Well, we set up 400 players in 4 cities. Is that what we did?
Pretty much. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously your room probably can't fit 400 BrightSign devices in there, but yeah, conceptually, and I say more than conceptually, because we've done this, several times with real clients, real experiences, been through that process with them. So this is not kind of assumptive in the way that this works. This is a real life environment that we've seen replicated several times, and it's from, historically not having this back in, several years ago now, to then having things like bdeploy and tagging and all of this management tools. It just makes it so much easier. It saves so much time, and the headache of that configuration just becomes, a non-issue.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's been really cool watching the industry change and grow as different customers come to the forefront and need different solutions created.
All right.
Are you guys ready for some questions?
I think we're ready. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Here we go.
We'll
So,
put Tim on the hot seat
first
here.
question. Alex asks, can you do 3 players with a sync command to sync across all 3 screens?
Yes, you can do. I very nearly put sync in this as one of the features, but with BrightSign having sync enabled, we've replicated that functionality. So you can create something within Signagelive called a sync group. There's actually no limit to the amount of players you can put in a sync group. You can synchronize players from different sides of the world if you wanted to. Not different sides of the world, they need to be on the same network for the time code, but you could have hundreds of devices all synchronized through that, and they could be identical assets, or you could actually configure them to be part of a super long LED kind of experience, or even like a video wall board. Completely up to you.
Great. Next question. Chris asks, what is the max video size you can place in a playlist? Also, what is the max playlist size?
So it's an interesting question, because a lot of the time it's not necessarily about maxing kind of file size, because the correct encoder will allow you to deliver any content. Your best practice is try and minimize how big the file is, just for purely the simplicity of delivering it and speed. When it's concerned about quality, absolutely supports things like 4K and 8K and whatever the player is able to deliver, to be 100% honest with you. But from a CMS management and just delivering and managing assets at volume, always try and encode it the best as possible. But we can support whatever your player is able to distribute, basically. A max size for playlist. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, it doesn't, like, bandwidth matters, especially when you're doing a mass deployment of players. And there's a certain place where, the quality of an image, you got to look at it and say, okay, the quality of this image, the trade-off between having a file size that's massive isn't worth the file size and the bandwidth that it's taking up. And that's a question you got to come to terms with yourself as a content creator.
Yeah. One of the things, kind of a point to the nose in the future of our development, one of the things I know is on our roadmap at the moment is auto encoding. So there's some more tools on that coming in the way.
Auto encoding, that's cool. We'll be looking forward to that.
I'll come back and do another one.
Max playlist size. That was the other
max playlist size.
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you, I don't know. I know that there's not necessarily an expiry limit on how many assets you can put in the playlist. it's again more just on the limitation of how much storage do you have on your player and how big do you need your playlist to be. There are some other tools within the platform that we've built called nested playlists. So actually, if you really were in a situation where your playlist is 300 assets, I wouldn't necessarily want to manage 300 asset playlists just purely from having to scroll. So what you could do is say, well, actually, we're going to make little campaigns in these nested playlists, and we'll have 4 nested playlists, and in each of those nested playlists are 20 assets or 40 assets or whatever you need it to be. So there's tools and tips to make even a really unbelievably large playlist more manageable that we can assist you with. But again, the tools are there if you need them.
Nested playlists, cool. Okay, next question. Jay asks, when you've created multiple zones with a video, is it important to make sure that you have the right BrightSign player model or the right BrightSign player that goes along with it?
Yes, absolutely. There are certain, depending on which BrightSign device you choose, some BrightSign devices allow for the ability for multi-video playback at the same time. I guess that's kind of where it's about. Every BrightSign player will support video, but when you start looking at multiple videos running at the same time, you do need to make sure you've got the appropriate hardware able to deliver it. I guess that's less of a Signagelive question than it is a BrightSign question.
That's
yeah,
right.
it's definitely BrightSign question. Yeah, it's the
I was just going to ask on Signagelive, is there a place to set your player model?
It's automatically registered when we connect to your ID, so you'll know what that is based on the configuration.
based on the serial number.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, very clever. Okay,
that's cool.
Yeah.
All right. Next question from Chris. Does the validity date work from the player time zone or a global time zone?
Great question. Yeah, it's from the player's time zone. So again, there's no right or wrong way of doing that, but for our perspective, we set that in the player time zone because 9 o'clock in the morning in Australia is going to be 9 o'clock in the morning different to the US. So if you wanted everything to turn up at 9, as long as your players are configured with the right time zone, which obviously again through the bdeploy functionality you can set up easily, it all will deploy at 9 o'clock wherever you are in the world.
All right, thanks. Okay, Alvin asks, how can you change network settings in Signagelive? For instance, different static IPs or a new wireless access point.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is the configuration. So in the first instance, you can do that through the bdeploy or whichever way you want to configure it and provision it. So you have the option to put in things like subnet masks and IP addresses. If you make any alterations to that, I mean, there's a couple of things to bear in mind, like making sure your firewalls are open enabled. You can go into the player and review all of the IP address information. And I believe you can go in there and make some alterations. I'll be honest with you, I'm not 100% into the technical side of network management, which I know is a bit of an anomaly for me. So, that's probably the most I can answer, but we can definitely pass you over more information if you need to.
Okay. And then Alvin has another follow-up question. Is there any way to log into a BrightSign device in Signagelive similar to the way you can use BrightAuthor Connected's DWS or Diagnostic Web Server?
So within the Signagelive user interface, what we try and do is make it as seamless as an experience as possible. So our intention is that you don't have to be hopping from one platform to the other. So all of those diagnostic tools that are more typically used in BrightSign are available in Signagelive. So you can go and check last time that player configured, last time it checked in, last time all of the updates happened. So you can go through on an individual player by player basis and go into that. You can also go have a look at reports. So see if, for example, if any player is struggling to connect and it's always at 4 p.m. or whatever it might be, you'll get that diagnostics from the reporting as well. You can go, it's fairly in-depth. I think we pretty much cover most of the things that are typically requested to make sure players are configured and running as seamlessly as possible. But I think we could probably go into that in some more detail in another call and actually focus on all of the diagnostic tools, because I know there's a lot. And the ones that I'm typically focusing on is it turned on? Is it working as expected? And is it connecting?
Quick follow-up. Can you reboot the player, and is there a screenshot? Can you do a remote screenshot?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, you can reboot the players. You can do that on a daily basis and set that to be your preference if you want to. You can also configure this to say, well, actually, I want to check on this player, I want to reboot it now. And when the next content check happens, which again is your choice, whether the content check happens on a minute by minute basis, once every 5, 10, 15 minutes. And then you say, next time it checks in, just reboot the player for me. You can also do the screenshot. So you can enable that on network wide and just say, I want a screenshot from all of my players. And then once every 5, 10 or 15 minutes, whatever your preference is, it's actually going to go and snapshot what was displaying on that screen. What's really nice about that feature and personal preference is a lot of the times when you're working on a user interface and you load up a screen and you say, and it says, this is what it's going to look like. You go, okay, great. I hope it does. But with the screenshot, it's actually sending that image back from the player. So if there are any anomalies or something that doesn't look right, you are going to see it in that screenshot because it's not assumptive anymore. It's actually delivering that content from the player back to you. So yes, the short answer.
Wonderful. And this is our last, we have 2 more questions. Chris asks, is the Power BI widget displaying an image or is it live data?
It's an image. Yeah, so it is displaying an image. It's going into that Power BI application, snapshotting that and taking that back through the data sync services to Signagelive. So that's your choice of whether it's once every 5 minutes, 10 minutes. 5 minutes is the maximum so far. There has been conversation about a more live environment, to put it that way. But yeah, for the moment, it is not designed to be kind of a within 1 second update. It's more for continuous dashboard updates for things like metrics and statistics or whatever it is you want to display.
And it produces does it produce like a transparent PNG? Is that what's happening?
Yeah, I think it's just a JPEG file. I'm not 100% sure what the file is it creates exactly. But yeah, it just creates a static image file, which then gets added into that rotation of content. Yeah.
So that pretty much guarantees that there's no, issues displaying it or, having live HTML or, JavaScript based data trying to adjust itself to that screen. Like you basically bake that into an image and the image shows up correctly every time.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of step 1 for us in data sync services. Although we're really excited the way the secure dashboard works because it's very much an all-in capturing service. So, Power BI is one example.
Yeah.
And there are hundreds and hundreds of different dashboard services out there, just talking about dashboards alone. Then you start looking at other applications that might want to be used, like Monday.com or whatever it is that they want to use to manage and display. This pretty much captures a huge array of those in one bite. So it's not just a Power BI app. It's a login app. You've got a login, you've got a password. You want to go grab that content. This is how you achieve that. There is further development even being looked at that we want to start building into, which are more bespoke Power BI applications or more focused on particular APIs that we know are often requested. So it's not the end for us on data sync services, it's only the very beginning, but it definitely is kind of that big open door of functionality that we now have.
So would it also make sense from a power, maybe just thinking in terms of Power BI or some of these dashboards, as a best practice, you should start thinking about setting up those projects, those dashboards, those data sets with the specific goal of showing on digital signage. Whereas I think normally this is, a web browser that you would pull up on a desktop. But now you can start thinking of these things as their end delivery is digital signage. So larger graphs, larger text boxes, like more visible, simplified data views, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And even that, and like kind of cross-pollinating some of the details that you want. So rather than just being a marketing only dashboard, you might make a marketing and sales metrics or just a general company overview. So you can get as clever with it as you want. And it's just the freedom to say whatever I can do in Power BI or Tableau or anything like that, I just want to go and take that and display it. It's just about unlocking that data for the users whilst also securing it down so others can't see it.
Right.
It's a real catch-22 with metrics is, do you really want to sit there and have your staff sitting browsing the reports every 5 minutes to see how they're doing? It's kind of about gamifying that as well, which is a term that I really like. Is about saying if you've got a sales team and you want to promote and incentivize, show them where they are in the metrics, and there's no better way of doing that than utilizing digital signage.
Yeah.
Single out the leader.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, last question, also from Chris. What is the lowest BrightSign firmware that Signagelive needs? Do we know that answer?
I know there is a preferred. I can do a quick dig here.
Oh, you know what?
But there is.
I just did this. I should know this.
Yeah, there is. It's not necessarily the lowest. I mean, we do have one that we recommend staying with. It's kind of like this is the one we're always updating with BrightSign to make sure the latest version is functioning. but let me have a look because
Was
I
it
don't honestly.
8.3.46 maybe?
I'll be honest with you, I have no idea. That could have been anything to me. Um,
But I know you had
let's have a
you had
look.
a document with a recommended player setup, and I think it does mention that OS there.
I did, yeah. Yeah, 8.2.72.
Oh, that's the minimum, 8272.
Minimum, yeah,
Okay.
I think so.
I think there might have been a
But yeah,
recommendation for an 8.3, if I'm not mistaken.
there may well be.
Yeah.
I can definitely follow up that with some more technical documents and someone who's more technical than me.
All right. Well, we covered all of the questions. We're at the hour. And Tim, I just wanted to thank you so much for your time today. It's been great getting to know you, getting to know the platform. It's really powerful. I'm really excited that we're partners in this game of digital signage. And yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah,
Very
thank
much
you so much,
appreciated.
Tim.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate the opportunity to come here and speak to you all. Hopefully I'll be back again at some point. But again, very much appreciate the opportunity.
And
Absolutely.
everybody, thanks for watching. Really appreciate it. Somebody is asking for John's email address. He put it in the chat. Everybody who asked questions, really appreciate it. If you celebrate St. Patrick's Day, happy St. Patrick's Day, and have a fabulous week. We'll see you
All
next
right.
time.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.